very much, Kitty. We're going to get started now in having our panelists involved here for a moment. I'm going to introduce them. But just to sort of set the stage for the rest of the evening, the goal really is, Kitty's painted a picture of a future which will be much less dependent on carbon-producing sources for electricity. But it's a complex one because we have things like variable renewables that have to be knitted together with the grid and digital technologies, and smart appliances, and things like that. And the goal of tonight is to have these panelists talk about these different areas and provide you a real view by the experts in the field about what's going on now, so you yourselves can make a judgment about how far away we are from where we want to be, see the kind of momentum that is moving forward right now, and have a chance to ask questions of these leading experts to understand, as perhaps a more lay audience, what are the real opportunities out there, how fast is this going to happen, how can we make it go faster, what are going to be the benefits, and what are the challenges. So that's really the goal for the next hour or so. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce the panelists and then ask a couple of leading questions, and I think I'll probably take it from there. And then, as Michael had said, you can please pass some cards out to the aisles, and we'll try to take some questions as we go along this evening. So thanks. To begin with, let me introduce the panel. Hello? Okay, yeah, thanks. First I wanted to introduce David Bewster. Raise your hand, thanks. He's with a company called EnerNOC. David co-founded EnerNOC in 2001 and is the company's president, currently oversees the organization's marketing and regulatory affairs efforts. As I understand it here, David has taken an active role in helping shape demand response markets, so the markets that have to come together to actually modify the demand on the grid, and has pioneered efforts to make customer participation in these markets more simple and effective through the use of improved data communications and automation technologies. So he'll be able to speak in that area in quite depth and detail. In fact, all of these experts here can probably cut across the lines and boxes I'm going to put them in, but at least you'll have a way to sort of mark them to a particular area. The second person I want to introduce is Tom Dinwoodie, who is sitting there next to Brylawski. Please raise your hand, thanks. He served as CEO and chairman of the board of Powerlight Corporation, which is a company that is involved in solar energy production. And having founded the company in 1995, it was then became part of and merged with SunPower Corporation, which is one of the largest solar manufacturers in the world, and has created now a highly vertically integrated company that can think about solar panel production and installation all the way from, at this point, the production of actual silicon boules that are cut into wafers, all the way to the installation in buildings. I think a couple of other points about Powerlight. Powerlight was inducted into the INC Hall of Fame, 500 Hall of Fame, as one of the fastest growing privately held companies for 5 years running. Mr. Dinwoodie is actually quite an expert on his own light. He has authored numerous papers and holds over 30 patents on building integrated photovoltaic and related products, and he'll be able to speak in some detail in that area. Next person I'd like to introduce, who some of you will know already, is Michael Brylawski. He's down here in the end. As you've heard already, Michael heads up our MOVE team, Mobility and Vehicle Efficiency. He will primarily be speaking in that area tonight, but again, he understands the connection between vehicles and what's going on in the electrical system. Next person I'd like to introduce is Roy Palmer, right here. He is Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs with Xcel Energy. Roy is the Managing Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs with Xcel, has for more than 4 years, for the last 4 years, and has recently been named the project executive for Xcel Energy's Smart Grid City project in Boulder, which is very exciting for those of us who work and live in Boulder, because it's becoming the test bed for that kind of work. And for those of you who might want a little depth around smart grid, and I'm going to misname this in some ways, but it's really thinking about how you connect the different parts of the grid, both the demand and supply side together, using modern technologies, which we generally don't use at this point, and by doing so, being able to modify demand and response, understand what's really going on in the system, and really drive quite a bit of efficiency. Roy also directs the political and governmental affairs efforts in several Xcel Energy states, including Colorado, and he'll be speaking in these areas. And last but not least, the person who probably needs the least introduction of all, but Amory Lovins, our co-founder sitting there in the center. And it would probably take me the better part of the next hour to introduce Amory completely, but for those of you who don't know him, he has a background in experimental physics. He was at Oxford, He's received 9 honorary doctorates, was a MacArthur Fellow, has written 19 heads of state, written 29 books and hundreds of papers, and consulted for scores of industries and governments worldwide. Amory is probably able to speak eloquently and with real depth of knowledge across all of the topics today. I've earmarked him as the efficiency expert, and that's certainly where he cut his teeth many years ago. But I would expect all the panelists here to cut across the different lines and divisions. So those are our panelists tonight. Let me get things kicked off and pass on the discussion to you guys. And my first question really is, given the future vision that Kitty presented, which is a more complex vision in some ways, but one that could potentially knit together a variety of technologies to get us to a much lower carbon level, could you, from your perspective, just provide your thoughts on the vision overall? And then most importantly, in your areas of depth of knowledge, what's going on today? What kind of progress is being made? And what should we let the audience know about some of the challenges and barriers? So without further ado, if you guys would be willing to kick it off, that would be great. Tom.
Hi, I'm ready to start. Thank you, Steve. Again, my name is Tom Dinwoodie with SunPower. And first of all, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here tonight. It's been an honor to be here on a panel of this sort. I've always been a fan of Amory's. He looks younger than I do, but I'm actually younger than he is. I was a senior in college when he gave a talk. He came through giving a talk with an entourage, and I became an instant fan at that point, and have been ever since. Amory. I think Kitty put forth a clear vision, and I think it's something that RMI has been talking about for quite some number of years. One question I'm going to be interested to have answered, perhaps by the other panelists, Roy and David, as to, RMI has always been out there sort of 10 to 15 to 20 years in front of the game, and hopefully with what Kitty's talking about, that's more like 7 or 5 or 4 or 3. It's time for the smart grid to come about, and for everything that the smart grid can bring to come about with it. So I'm very interested in the issue of timing. As for the solar industry, which I'm sort of here to talk about, I'm truly an optimist for the solar industry. I've been with the industry for a long time, since the early 90s, and the growth of the industry is in my blood. I was with a company that had an 80% year-over-year growth, and up until the present, and since the mid-90s roughly. And so I know where this industry is going and how that continues to come about. It's really, today, growing about as fast as an industry can grow, at about 50% a year worldwide. What's interesting is I get a question often as to when will solar's contribution become meaningful, and it's actually something which, given where it is today and given its growth rate, you can really chart a projection. Today's 50% a year growth, we're at roughly almost a terawatt hour we will provide this year in the U.S., which is a teeny tiny amount compared to 4,000 terawatt hours that we will consume in the U.S. this year. But if you grow that industry by 50% a year, say to 2012, 2015, and then lean that growth rate down to something sustainable as a very large industry, say 15% a year, what you grow is an industry that's serving 100% of U.S. electrical needs by as early as 2040. That may seem a long way out, but it's actually meaningful in the context of climate change. And what's really interesting about it is that solar is not going to go it alone. Solar is going to work with energy efficiency. The demand curve should flatten and then some with energy efficiency. And you've got wind, which is a much larger industry today, solar, geothermal, CSP, concentrated solar power. And when you add them up, we should be able to do this much well in advance of 2040. Al Gore recently talked about 10 years, say to 2020. That's probably technically feasible. We'll have energy storage issues, but technologically, there are no breakthroughs required in the wind industry, in the photovoltaic industry. There are not breakthroughs required. There will be challenges in the energy storage industry, but that is coming along. A lot of money is being put into energy storage, which will handle one-day intermittent generation. So perhaps that gives you some sense of time frame for where the solar industry is going, and I'll leave it at that.
I can jump in and build on that and also talk about my thoughts on the vision that Kitty laid out. I think it's a great vision. I think it's a vision that requires first and foremost sort of shared vision. I think it's great to be part of a panel and to really, we need to think about this in an interdisciplinary way, the way that Kitty laid it out. So I think having, each of us in our own industries are potentially siloed, and having opportunities to be with all of you tonight and thinking about a shared vision is absolutely critical. Another thing that's critical here is having a long-term commitment toward that shared vision. We need to figure out what that vision is, and then we need a long-term commitment from our political and regulatory leadership to reach that vision. We've seen that the sort of boom and bust start and stops based on short-term weather cycles or energy prices isn't going to get us there. If we really want to rid ourselves of greenhouse emitting fossil fuels, we need to have a long-term commitment. We need to have regulatory constructs that really promote what we're trying to do with renewables and demand-side resources as well. My company, EnerNOC, stands for Energy Network Operations Center, and the piece of the puzzle where we fit is on the demand side of the equation. We're focused on specifically helping commercial and industrial and institutional users of electricity become much more efficient and much more active participants in electricity markets. What we see on a daily basis is a complete lack of information technology that's been applied in the energy industry relative to other industries. It's amazing to me the commercial and industrial and institutional customers that we speak with on a daily basis, how few of them have real-time data and insight into their energy consumption. And the old mantra of you can't manage what you don't measure stands true. And so our company is all about getting data to these end-use customers and providing the technology and the financial incentives so that they can actually participate in markets. And what we're really focused on as our core solution is something called demand response that Kitty talked about. And demand response, in the simplest definition, is about engaging end users so that they're more responsive in their demands for energy based on either high wholesale prices or reliability events. The way that the electric power industry works today is completely broken. There's a disconnect between the wholesale and the retail side of the market. And what I mean by that is the vast majority of energy consumers don't pay a real-time price or any sort of dynamic rate for their electricity consumption. No matter how scarce generating resources are or how constrained our transmission and distribution networks are at any given point in time, end users typically pay a fixed rate for electricity, so they have no incentive to actually reduce their demand to make the system more efficient overall. And demand response is all about engaging those end users so that they can be more proactive, so that we don't need to build power plants and operate power plants to meet that last peak of demand. So what we've done is install technology at over 3,000 commercial and industrial sites at this point, and we're helping these customers. We're helping them to identify discretionary loads, and then we're actually able to bid that capacity or those megawatts into the market, and it gets treated as a functionally equivalent resource to generation with a much more benign environmental footprint, and it's much faster to market, and it's a much better resource because it's getting end users to actually pay attention and be responsive. And what we've seen, which is really exciting, is that this demand response opportunity serves as a very powerful gateway to get end users to be more in tune with their overall energy consumption and to get much more energy efficient overall. So we've made great progress as an industry, I think, with ubiquitous communication networks that exist today that makes this sort of business possible, with control technologies, I think with business model innovations, and I think with utilities and regulators really starting to look at this as a real resource. But there are significant roadblocks and a lot more that needs to be done to make this really be in scale and make difference.
Roy Palmer with Xcel Energy. If you can see the lights, it's thanks to us. We serve Denver and 8 other states. We're a very traditional utility. We're vertically regulated. We have coal plants. We have nuclear plants. We also have a lot of wind. We're the nation's largest retail provider of wind energy. We have biomass plants. But we look out as all of this unfolds. We see climate change regulation. We see energy prices starting to go up. And we're a for-profit company that looks around and says, what's the role of the utility in the future with all of this? I probably should have gone last because in the energy debate, utilities always go last. That's the way they're compensated. That's the way they're regulated. They're punished for innovation. If we do something that doesn't work, the regulators punish us by taking all the money away from us. So risk is beaten out of the utility industry across the country. And it's also regulated almost exclusively at the federal level, or at the state level, except interstate transmission. So you have a series of state regulators that are looking for what's best for their community. We look at this issue as a company in terms of where the dollars are. And the premise I want to put to you is, as much as you care about global climate change and conservation, and as motivated as you all are to come here tonight, the vast majority of our population really isn't paying attention to those things. But what we see happening on the cutting edge as a utility is a consumer base that's starting to pay attention because price is coming into the equation. Environmental concerns are for the first time really kind of surfacing at a wider level. People are interested in solar, they're interested in all these things. What they don't have as a consumer is any information about how they use their power. As we sit here today, in every city that we serve, except for 5,000 meters in Boulder and growing right now, we're in the middle of a big build-out smart grid project that we could talk about. As we sit here today, we can't tell you if your power is on or off. We generate power at these big plants in whatever fashion, and we send them down. Somebody said the rickety grid before. It's the same, some of our stuff's, 50, 60, 80 years old. Old poles, old wires, but it's worked fine under the old paradigm. But when you start layering in carbon considerations and cost considerations, you can't generate it the same way. So we start from the premise that we need to provide to the customer the information, and that's the project that we're working on in Boulder. We're trying to be a utility that goes first, and we're trying to build a grid in a relatively isolated city, starting from the power plant all the way to the end-use device that's horizontally connected. And I'm talking about having the substations that know what's happening at the power plant, it's happening at the home. The transformers have sensors and are automated. And we're trying to understand this from something that makes historic capitalist sense. Is what's the price equation in here? What's the value we can create? And this technology all exists today. It's not a question of inventing brand new technology. It's a question of taking it from these little stovepipe applications all over the country, putting them together all in one place. And we've created a partnering model with Accenture and Current Technologies, 6 or 7 different in-home product solutions, energy management companies. We have solar partners, plug-in electric hybrid vehicles are a part of our project, energy storage. We're trying to create a laboratory in Boulder where the bright minds of a lot of people in this room have a utility grid that they can actually access and have that instant two-way communication from the utility to the home. It's all connected on the internet, where you as a consumer can one time sit down and set your energy preferences in your house and never have to touch them again. And you may set your preference to lowest cost. You may set your preference to read a green price signal that comes into the house. You know, we're trying to do demand response based on carbon. You know, but I mean, that's where our vision is. And if it's not all wrapped up in the meter, you know, we want partners like Google and Microsoft who are in this. There was an announcement yesterday in the paper that Google and GE are teaming together to do smart grid. Well, there's an understanding that the world is changing, and if you don't believe it, I will just come back in 5 years and 10 years and see how you use energy. It's going to be vastly different from the way you do today.
I maybe step in so Amory can orchestrate the synergy among us, but I think of that debate and the vice presidential debate in 1984, where Stockdale was like, "Who am I and why am I here?" Well, if you know vehicles currently, they pretty much don't use any electricity. And in terms of oil, you probably have seen some things like, let's use nuclear power to get off oil. Well, you also probably know that of our oil use, only about 2% goes to electricity. So right now, vehicles, which I'm representing here as my hat today, is literally a separate system, a separate technology system, a separate infrastructure system, a separate use system from electricity. And if you guys watched the news this week, and you didn't watch, there's a big story, I don't remember what it is this week, but another story that came out on Tuesday is, guys, did anyone see the Volts that came out? Yeah, those who saw it, who liked the old Volt versus the new Volt? Old Volt, new Volt, okay. Old, okay. Well, long story short, we are about to see two industries, two infrastructures that are completely separate today start to come together. And that is the gasoline, oil, transportation infrastructure and the electricity and utility infrastructure, and they're coming together. And the Volt really represents the first major element, major automaker element, that is saying we are going to create what's called a plug-in hybrid. And I'm assuming most people are familiar with that. If you're not, what it really is it's a vehicle that essentially is like a Prius. It runs on both electricity and gasoline, but unlike a Prius, it's got a big battery pack. And you can plug it in, and if it's the Volt and some of the conversions that we see, it's about maybe 10, 20, 40 miles that you can get on electricity. And the real, why does that matter? Well, who here would like to pay $1 a gallon for gas? I would. I mean, what is it at for? Well, when you're running on electricity, it's about the equivalent of $1 a gallon. Maybe 2 to 3 cents a mile, compared to, what is it, $4 a gallon for gasoline, 15 to 16 cents a mile. So the value proposition of the plug-in hybrid from an oil and fuel perspective is huge. And the implications here are, what does it mean if a significant fraction of our vehicles, and it's going to take a while to get there because in the automotive industry, I mean, Kitty's vision is beautiful, but the automotive industry works a little slower. It takes about 4 to 5 years to get a vehicle to market. We've got about 200, 250, depending on the account of million vehicles. We only sell 15 million a year, so the fleet takes a lot of turnover. But you're going to see more and more electric vehicles out there. And the big question, I think there's two questions. One is, what are the implications to the electric grid? Can it handle it? And I think the short answer is, if it's like a Volt and you plug it into your outlet, like say in your garage, it's at 120 volts, the answer is it's going to really suck down approximately about the same electricity as your air conditioner, maybe 2 fridges. So in other words, what utilities are saying is we didn't have a big effort of can we handle air conditioning. They met the load, they dealt with it. And the Volt coming on board is going to be like a lot of air conditioners, and we're not going to see 20 or 30 million in 2 or 3 years. It's going to be a little bit incremental. But as it grows, the question is, can we handle it? And I think today the answer is probably yeah, because if you're talking about a plug-in hybrid, because it's not a full electric vehicle, you're saying, the rule of thumb is about a terawatt hour, what the solar industry produces, can do 500,000 plug-in hybrids. And we use about, 4,000 terawatt hours. So if you look at our whole fleet, that's only about 10% of our electricity grid is with plug-in hybrids. And so that's why the NRDC and EPRI, which is a big industry group for the utilities, published a report that said we can have about 80% of our fleet, if they're plugged in at night, as plug-in hybrids without having one new power plant. So the answer is, this is a pretty good shift and a pretty good win-win of the two infrastructures. What RMI is looking at is, okay, if we can handle it, what are maybe some of these roadblocks and bottlenecks and challenges? Because we all know, in theory and practice are the same, but in practice they're not. What are some of the roadblocks that can create stumble this vision. But number two is, and I'll leave it on this, what are the opportunities we could see as these two infrastructures come together? And we're doing this thing, I don't know if anyone saw the great solutions, RMI Solutions Journal that we just put, it's going to be the hottest nonprofit magazine. We just had our first issue, but the cover was, and thank Lou Wells and his team for that, but the cover is on the smart garage. And what the smart garage is about isn't, can utilities handle these vehicles? Is it, how do we turn this as an opportunity to help create that next generation utility that Kitty talked about? And I'll just give you a teaser. One way is, because Kitty talked about, as we say right now, we have really peaky demand, we don't know when things are on or off. We have big centralized plants that have different supply. Well, vehicles, if you think about it, especially plug-ins, when you go home at night, let's say you go home at night at 6 p.m., you're going to go to work the next day at 7, they're going to be parked for 13, 14 hours. It's only going to take them 6 hours to charge. So you only need that thing charged 6 hours out of that 14 hours it's parked. Well, if utilities start putting in a lot more wind, and we heard that wind is peaky, and it's mostly at night, what if that car charges only when that windmill is gone? And thus you can actually, what they call firm that windmill and help make that wind more valuable, because at night we don't use as much electricity, and it's currently a lot of it's being wasted. So that's one aspect of how we see cars and the grid coming together. It's not just going to be a problem, we're seeing an opportunity.
There are at least 3 good and convincing reasons for transforming the way we make and use electricity, namely climate change, security, and affordability. Funny thing is, they all lead you to the same set of changes. They all converge. There's no trade-off. They all lead you to an efficient, distributed, renewable, affordable, resilient power system. I start with efficiency because at least 3/4 of our electricity is wasted in this country and could be saved with existing technologies and implementation methods cheaper than just running a thermal power plant, even if building it costs nothing, and much cheaper than building one. We showed this back in the late 80s, and the utilities think tank EPRI came to broadly similar conclusions. They found only 40 to 60% savings at a somewhat higher cost, but still cheaper than the delivered cost of just operating a thermal plant. And they would also agree with me that the technologies since then have improved more than we've used them up, so efficiency's become a bigger and cheaper resource. That is, the low-hanging fruit keeps mushing up around the ankles and spilling it over our waders while the innovation tree pelts our head with more fruit. The big obstacle to capturing this potential, and we're just starting to have a regulatory conversation around this in Colorado, as in many other states, is that traditionally the state regulators form retail prices in a way that rewards companies like Xcel for selling you more electricity and penalizes them for cutting your bill. This is just as dumb as a possum. We've got to stop doing it. We know how. About 10 states have now reformed that, and I hope that Xcel and others like it make a lot of money on efficiency, because it's the best buy for all of us. We need to align there in our incentives. But close on the heels of efficiency, and in some ways even leading it in market activity, is distributed generation. Thomas Edison did that. He had little power plants. But for the first roughly 100 years of this business, power plants were a lot more expensive and less reliable than the grid. So it made sense to build a bunch of big power plants, the bigger the better for economies of scale, and have them back each other up through the grid. Funny thing is, over the last quarter century, those conditions have quietly reversed. We now have power plants that are cheaper and more reliable than the grid. So much more that 98 or 99% of our power failures actually originate in the grid. So now if you want to have affordable, reliable electricity, it's better to make it at or near the customers and bypass the grid. Now, for an industry that for over a century has grown up on big plants and big grids, this is a really radical notion. But there are certain analogies that come to mind. If I were to tell you, lots of people need computing services, so we better build more big mainframe computer centers where you come submit your job to the high priest, and after a while you get your output back. And if you have a long memory like me, you'd say, yeah, we did that in the 60s, but nowadays we use network PCs. Where have you been lately? Or if I told you many people make phone calls, you better go build some central exchanges to handle all this traffic, and they'll be all full of relays and copper wires. You say, no, we do distributed packet switching. But the same mental revolution, the same rearrangement of the metal furniture is only starting to come to the electricity business, but it is coming with a vengeance. Let me define a term from the Economist magazine, Micropower, and it is combined heat and power, also known as cogeneration, where you make electricity and useful heat together in a building or factory, saving over half the fuel money and emissions, plus all renewables, minus big hydro. So the renewables we're left with are just what are called distributed, or decentralized renewables. That doesn't mean that you can't have hundreds of megawatts in one wind farm. The wind farms are just 1 or 2 megawatts apiece, so they get economies of scale in production and so on. Well, micropower, funny thing, has gone from a fringe activity to a dominant player. It now provides 1/6 of the world's total electricity, somewhat more than nuclear. It provides 1/3 of the world's new electricity. It's growing with enormous speed. It provides 1/6 to over half of all electricity in a dozen industrial countries. Just the distributed renewables were a $71 billion equipment market worldwide last year. And in China, which has the world's most ambitious nuclear program, their installed capacity of distributed renewables is already 7 times bigger and growing 7 times faster. We used to think that you couldn't do very much with the variable renewables, sun and wind, because they don't always work. Of course, no power source works all the time. They all break at some point. Standard fossil plants break about 8% at a time, for example. And we're starting to discover that even if you have quite a high use of sun and wind, which are not fully reliable but are forecastable, we call it weather forecasting, and if you diversify them in type of technology and where you put it, you have different weather in different places, and if you integrate it with the supply and demand resources on the grid, funny thing, to keep the lights on with a given reliability, you actually need less storage and backup that we have already built and paid for to cope with the intermittence of large thermal plants, because those fail unpredictably in a 60th of a second in billion-watt chunks and usually for a long time. And stuff like sun and wind just doesn't do that. So I think the common view that we are going to need a lot more storage in this new world is overblown, or perhaps even backwards, although there are also revolutions coming at us in storage that will indeed greatly expand the use of things like solar. Now, the smallest profitable book that was mentioned earlier, Economist Book of the Year in 2002, actually had a subtitle, The Hidden Economic Benefits of Making Electrical Resources the Right Size. And we showed in that book, which was 27 years in gestation, like kind of birthing a whale cat, that there are 207 unexpected benefits of making power at the right scale for the job. For example, there's less financial risk in building small, fast modular units than big, slow, lumpy units. Or renewables protect you from fuel price fluctuations, and that makes them more valuable. Or you can move distributed resources around. If they don't work well where you put them, you stick them on the truck and put them where they'll work better and be worth more. So, well, it turns out that these distributed benefits often, if not even typically, increase economic value of distributed resources by about a factor of 10. That's enough to flip practically any investment decision. And this revolution in distributed and renewable resources is happening before the market even recognizes most of the distributed benefits, but it's starting to. The last general point I want to make here is about resilience. We've already seen a lot of regional and national power failures around the world. We're seeing more of them because federal policy here and abroad is to respond to the last blackout by fixing whatever caused it, but to reinforce the over-centralized architecture that really caused it, the underlying cause. And the more we build big power plants and big power lines, the worse the problem is going to get. It's the same cause and the same mathematics as suppressing forest fires. If you're getting really good at suppressing forest fires, you build up a huge fuel load, and the first one that gets away from you is catastrophic. And it's very much the same with the grid. I did a book about all this back in '82, which is still the definitive unclassified study of domestic energy vulnerability. It's on our website called Brittle Power, Energy Strategy for National Security. But there is a recent reinforcement of this message that's really quite scary from a Defense Science Board task force I served on. And in fact, our lead trustee's husband, Jim Woolsey, chaired the policy panel on that. The whole thing was co-chaired by Jim Schlesinger, former Secretary of Defense. And basically, it advised the military that for its mission continuity, it should not rely on the electric grid, because the grid has such serious physical and cyber vulnerabilities that it could go down on a very large scale for a very, very long time, and even put us back in the 7th century. So they advised the military to equip its 585 domestic bases and others abroad with islandable, that is able to run with or without the grid, netted microgrids that can serve the base and the surrounding communities where its people live. And it turns out this is very practical and will often save money. Where this is taking us is a different architecture of the electricity system, which through the intelligence of the grid and the kinds of distributed, diverse, renewable, efficient resources that go into it, will take the major failures that are now inevitable by design and make them impossible by design, whether through accident or malice. So that is a much better world to live in if you want to be richer, cooler, fairer, and safer.
Thanks very much. If I were just to summarize the last 20 minutes of discussion, I'd sort of probably say the same, and maybe putting words in people's mouths, but I think if we take the vision that Kitty put up there, each of the panelists is saying, yes, this can be done, real momentum is being created, there are no doubt a number of challenges in front of us, but I think it gives you a sense of this isn't science fiction that might happen sometime for your grandchildren. In fact, it's happening right now. There have been a lot of great questions that have come up here, and what I'm going to try to do is, rather than read individual note cards, just try to synthesize them a little bit. And one of the ones that's come out, I think that builds on what has just been discussed, is how do we make sure this happens faster and better and ensure that it's really going to be able to take off. And that, I think, the broad questions come, what are the roles of governments, whether it's state, local, or federal? What kind of money is going to be required? What are the role of customers, both small and large? And so if we could spend a little bit of time just talking about each of your own opinions about what's it going to take to accelerate and the adoption and ensure that we don't go backwards. And I think one of the underlying questions is here embedded, given some of the turmoil we've seen in the financial markets recently, the drop in oil prices, the uncertainty of energy prices overall, which tend to whipsaw the system. What's it really going to take? But I'll leave it quite broad. If each of you would comment, you can pick government regulatory issues, consumer knowledge, technology development, whatever you'd like. But I think the audience would like to hear about what can we do to make this thing go faster and better, cheaper.
Next week I'm going back to meet with the FERC, and actually a couple of different FERC commissioners and some of their staff.
That's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which controls interstate transmission.
They control interstate transmission, and they want to understand smart grid. And The reason is because they're regulators and they want to regulate. I would say if you want to make it go really slow, put government in charge of telling you what kind of design you have to have. So the message that I want to take back to them is let the free market flourish. You know, let these guys be creative. There'll be successes and failures. Let the solar industry be creative and be successful. But a part of that too is to let consumers be creative. You know, we want to give consumers information and not penalize people into good behavior. You know, it's up to utilities like us to convince regulators that we ought to price electricity not on an average basis for everything you use at every single day during the hour, but at differential levels which induces conservation. And it's up to us to create a vision where you have enough information about how you use electricity to find ways to save money. I want people, and I believe this will be the case, they will be driving plug-in electric hybrid vehicles not because they're environmentally aware, because it saves them money. Or maybe on a radical concept that they don't want to send oil money to Iran or Iraq. I mean, maybe that's their motivation. But whatever the motivation is, if you create a price incentive in there and create information that allow people to make those choices, I think that's how you get the revolution.
I've actually been one of your suppliers for 16 years. Before it was legally required, as it now is in about 40 states, I was doing net metering, making solar electricity and running my meter backwards at the same price. And I can tell you, it's really fun to get a call from your utility saying, are you okay? Is there something wrong? We haven't had a net bill for you for months. In fact, we got to send you a check. And it's even more fun when the 100-year flood we have every few years now takes the power poles down by the river, and you can call up the emergency services and say, hey, you want to come recharge the radio batteries? Come on over, we got juice.
But here's the dilemma. I'm not going to invest a lot of money in the grid and the infrastructure to allow him to do that, so that he doesn't pay me anything. The only way I make money now is
No, but
on
the point is
throughput.
what I'm providing to you, which is support out on the end of a rural system, very costly to maintain. I want to make solar on my roof, and I have an approved inverter on the safe list. I can plug it in and start generating away and running my meters backwards, and I don't need to tell the utility, let alone get permission. If I meet Underwriters Lab and local electric code, and ideally something called IEEE 1547, which tells you how to interface safely, nothing more should be required of it. That would, but I want to emphasize also, we need some kinds of regulation. One of the things I expect FERC to do shortly is to open up transmission access. We have well over 200 billion watts of wind capacity waiting in the queue to connect to the grid. A lot of it is in the Dakotas, one of the world's greatest wind resources, especially on private land. 300 gigawatts sitting there unbuilt because basically the lignite guys sit on the lines and won't let competitors in. FERC's going to fix them.
Can I make one comment on this? Because I agree with this theme that I think a lot of this revolution that we're talking about is going to be customer driven. And if only all customers were as savvy as Amory, they knew their sine wave of their electricity they were selling back to utility. But and one example I just heard today, and by the way, was, you know, this whole weekend for the people here for NSC, and afterwards, we've got tons of people from RMI and the team working on this. If you have good questions, you can talk to us, you can talk to people from RMI as well. But one data point when people on my team told me today was that when PG&E gave consumers that information we're talking about for electric vehicle charging, because there were a decent amount of EVs in California in the 90s, they do called tiered pricing. And the sort of the elephant in the room on EVs and PHEVs are, as I said, it's not going to be a problem unless people decide they really like that cheap electricity and they start charging it in during peak times, like the middle of the day. So the way PG&E did it is they actually gave customers a choice. You could have electricity during the day, but it'll cost you about 40 cents a kilowatt hour. Or you can charge it at night and we'll give it to you for 6 cents. So lo and behold, they gave people this information, and 80% of consumers charge their vehicles after 12 a.m. at night. So if you can empower the consumer with this, I think it's going to accelerate this revolution. However, it's got to be two ways, because the dilemma is of this great smart grid that we're seeing emerge in Boulder and California as well. is also on this track, and I think Texas. But it's only 20% of utilities that have really signed on to say, we are going to do this. You have 80% of utilities that haven't. And so this really only works, this tiered pricing, making sure people can plug in at night, if you can enable the consumers with smart grid throughout the country. And that's where regulation comes in. That's where you're going to have to have government intervention. By the way, the whole idea of free markets and government with what's happened this week, I think they're a little mixed up. But anyway, so that's what's going to happen. And I wasn't editorial anything.
This might not be an ideal time politically to tell FERC to stop regulating and let the free market do it.
You're right.
Yeah. Let me add one thing is...
We tried that in California, and what happened is just what's been happening lately on Wall Street. A lot of, PhDs in applied math, game theory specialists started gaming the system, and they discovered, lo and behold, under the nutty rules that regulators who didn't understand the system had put in to deregulate, they could make more money selling less electricity at a higher price instead of more at a lower price. That's exactly what they did. It's as if 30 billion watts just kind of called in sick. But of course the lights went off.
So I think that one of the messages I'm hearing from is let the market work. And that's what we need to do, we need to let the market work. I've been essentially selling solar systems since the mid-90s, and I'm very proud to say that I've never sold a green system. We sell internal rate of return, we sell lower cost power, and it sells...
And constant price power.
And constant prices, a hedge against fluctuating price power. And it's a good sale. And the situation today is, so we can do that in many markets, certainly where there's high sunshine and where there's high utility rates. Okay, so those are the early markets for us. The issue about the market today is that there is not a free market in the energy sector. If you can download a report from the General Accounting Office, GAO, showing how there's over $100 billion a year subsidies to the coal, gas, and nuclear industry. So the solar industry, as an example, has been pushing for a 30% investment tax credit to offset that market incorrection, or market problem. Distortion, thank you, Amory. And similar with the wind industry, there's a production tax credit that they're looking for. And the problem is that we've had these ITCs and PTCs to help offset this market distortion, but they're on again, off again. So we have an ITC this year, it's set to expire in December. The industry is unable to make the investments necessary to continue its growth into 2009 because Congress cannot see its way to extending that credit. So what we need, Stephen, you're asking the question about barriers. We need consistency in policy. We need correction of the markets, and we need consistent policy. That would go a long way to making this happen. That would be a market correction. In addition to that, what we need is to basically grease the skids. The smart grid is going to do a lot to grease the skids for the industry. It's going to help with the market correction, in fact. Things like national interconnection standards for solar equipment, distributed generation, and also a national renewable portfolio standard would help utilities to overcome. A renewable portfolio standard is a mandate where utilities are asked to deploy increasing amounts of renewable generation. And utilities, there was a lot of inertia with utilities. They've done things the way they've done for a lot of years, and it's worked for them. And it's difficult, and it's understandably difficult for them to make decisions with new types of investments. And so a renewable portfolio standard is a way to accelerate that process, to get utilities interested in bringing on renewable generation.
But I should emphasize a renewable portfolio standard is not a hidden subsidy forcing utility ratepayers to pay more to get renewable energy because somebody thinks it's a good idea. It actually will reduce their long-run costs for a very simple reason that Tom already mentioned, that the sun, wind, and so on, once you install them, produce electricity at a constant price for decades, and they don't fluctuate like, say, natural gas prices, which are nailing a lot of customers in areas that burn gas to make electricity. So it turns out when you analyze it, that your portfolio of power sources ought to be diversified to include quite a lot, like tens of % of renewables, for the same reason and with the same mathematics that you ought to put some riskless treasuries in your financial portfolio to improve its overall risk-reward ratio. Even if the renewables cost more per kilowatt hour initially, they will cost less over the long run because they don't have to pay for that risk of fluctuating fuel price. So the smartest utilities are starting to realize that that kind of diversification is in everybody's financial interest.
I want to go back to points that both Roy and Amory have made that I think is very important in terms of a broken construct in the industry. We want markets to reign and have markets have the way, but utilities need to be involved, and utilities need to be, slow moving and thoughtful. The utilities are maintaining the reliability of our electric power industry, so they need to be involved, and they need to be incentivized to do the right thing. The way that the regulatory constructs exist today, utilities have a disincentive to promote energy efficiency and demand resources because it's cannibalizing kilowatt hour sales, it's asking them to sell less of their product, and furthermore, there's constructs where they can only earn a rate of return on capital investments, and so things like energy efficiency and demand response, which are often faced the lowest hanging fruit, the utilities have a clear disincentive to pursue. That's a fundamental problem. We need to correct that so that utilities have incentives to promote the most cost-effective environmental solutions, not the ones that incentivize them to sell more resources. And that's something that we need regulatory oversight. And as Amory said, we have a lot of states considering decoupling and other sort of innovations to solve that problem. But we need a lot more of that. We need the utilities involved because they're going to be the ones that are intimately involved in driving the solutions.
Thanks a lot. Again, this is maybe a more difficult discussion to summarize, but it's one that's sort of near and dear to my heart. There's definitely a role in here in the markets, and we need to unleash the power of the markets. But the electrical system is complex, and it is highly regulated. And the question is, how do we get government to also sort of grease the skids, as it was said? One of the things I'd say to the audience, and I'm hardly a deep utility expert, given my background that Michael told you, it's scattered, if anything. But what I've learned is we need to sort of keep a steady pace. We have to keep a clear focus, and maybe we need to try to get the 80% answer out there and moving, and not the 99.9% answer. In that, I think clarity and focus and movement is one of the things we really require right now, not just simply looking to get the perfect solution. We'll probably get both over time, but that's sort of my sense as an outsider. We're going to run out of time fairly soon, but there's been a lot of great questions, and there's another one I do want to ask, and again, I'm just sort of synthesizing across the patch here. What are the implications here for the world? Is America a leader, a laggard? Are there other examples that are better than us? And how do we put that in the context of a place like China, which is building roughly a gigawatt coal plant per week and plans to do so for the foreseeable future? And I'd be really interested from the panelist's point of view, where we stand in this whole equation. Maybe we're way behind and we should turn to look to the Egyptians. Or can we be a leader? And I'd just love to hear, I think the audience would as well, based on the questions I've seen, your thoughts and comments on that.
So my feeling is that America today is a laggard, clearly a laggard, but that can turn on a dime. So Americans, we consume what, on the order of 4 times the amount of energy per capita as a European. I lived in Europe in 2004, and I wouldn't say that they have a lesser standard of living. Germany today is the world's Germany. Germany, which has the average solar installation of Nome, Alaska. Okay, it's got the world's largest market for solar today. It installs about a gigawatt per year. about a nuclear power plant per year of solar photovoltaic. And behind them are Japan, Spain, California, and I think California is the third largest market in the world for solar. Okay, so we're a laggard in many respects, but we have got technology to turn this on a dime with the proper correction made in the markets, and with something coming along like smart grid.
We're starting to see this, in fact, with this turning on a dime in certain places. The U.S. makes only about 6% of its electricity with micropower versus 16% of the world, and up to 52, 54%, I believe, in Denmark. But in Texas, well, with Texas as the leader, the U.S. last year installed more wind power than it's installed coal capacity in the last 5 years combined. And the U.S. or China or Spain installed more wind power last year than the world installed nuclear power. In fact, in 2006, nuclear added 1.4 gigawatts of capacity, more than all of it in upgrading coal plants. Photovoltaics added more than that. Wind power added 10 times that much. Micropower added 30 to 41 times that much. The revolution already happened. Sorry if you missed it. But I think here and there, and we have, representatives of that right here, the U.S. is an occasional leader, and I think the most dramatic area for that is in the emerging plug-in hybrid and vehicle-to-grid movement. Remember, these cars are parked 96% of the time. NREL figured that if we had a half plug-in hybrid fleet, that would make a new market for 230 gigawatts of night wind power, roughly the amount stuck in the queue now waiting for interconnection. And once those turbines were installed, they would run whenever the wind blows, and that means that over the year they would make more electricity than all the coal plants make. So this is really a big deal. And then if you start selling back power from the parked cars, plug-in hybrids, battery cars, or fuel cell cars, to the grid downtown on hot afternoons where it's most valuable, it turns out the car fleet would have ultimately 6 to 12 times as much output capacity as all the utilities now own. So it doesn't take very many people enjoying the new kinds of value proposition this produces to put the coal and nuclear plants out of business and drive the revolution a great deal faster.
Can I add to that, Amory, in terms of the good news is, as Amory said, I think especially in terms of vehicles, we are the leaders. This is a good news story for plug-in hybrids. Now, the bad news is we also consume a quarter of the world's oil, or 3% of the population, so we are vehicle focused. And the other bad news, Amory, this is one of your quotes, is that you look at really the critical technology in an electric vehicle, and this is where it's one of its the biggest interface with the grid, is the battery, the energy storage. And you look at where batteries are made, particularly at the cell level. As Amory says, right now, we import oil. Well, if we don't figure out our battery infrastructure domestically, we're going to be importing batteries, so we don't import them. And by the way, we're basically shifting value abroad to a different component, different technology.
Well, we've done this before. Tom, the U.S. used to have over half market share in the world photovoltaic market. What is it now?
We invented photovoltaics, and we had well over 50% manufacturing today in the U.S. I'm sure less than 10%.
Yeah, 6 or 8%.
And let me add, it's so much that this Volt, this great success story, talked to some executives there, will tell you it's actually going to be classified today, unless they change the regulations, as an import, even though it's manufactured here, because by value, the batteries are going to be made in China. So I think the key is, and it's not that it's necessarily bad to have global trade, it's just that there are system effects that we have to look at. And from that matter, one thing I'd add as well, in terms of where we can lead, is by, and goes back to where the government can play a role, the vehicles themselves, in terms of what's going to really scale them, it is the batteries are expensive right now. We do need help, and that's where, if you look at the business model of plug-in hybrids, the big winner is really going to be utilities. They really could make a lot of money on avoided cost. They're actually going to sell a lot of power, because if these things are plugged at night, this is power that they're not selling now. I equate it to going to TJ Maxx for that discount outlet clothes, getting discount outlet electricity at night. But the automakers, when you dive into it, they're not going to make money. In fact, these things might lose them. So a big challenge of getting this together is for the government to maybe take some leadership and not necessarily dump, let's say, $85 billion into it, but let's say really facilitate good exchange of value flows from utilities to automakers so there is a win-win. Because right now, to be truthful, if you talk to automakers, they love plug-in hybrids, they know they need to make electric vehicles to survive, to compete in the game, but none of them know, and I'll be honest with you, none of the automakers know how they're going to make money on those cars. So.
I wanted to just add one more thing on the car debate. Increased electricity sales is one interest from the utility standpoint, but as we look at the PHEV equation, we're really focused on the carbon component. By linking the transportation sector with the utility sector, we see it as a big part of our carbon reduction strategy. What I'm talking about is you take today's fleet and powered them all on electric cars from coal plants. There's a significant carbon reduction. If you powered them on gas plants, which are about half as carbon intensive, but even bigger carbon reduction. If you power them with solar that's stored in a battery or directly to the PHEV lights, of course, it's 100% carbon reduction. I believe no matter who wins this next presidential election, Obama or McCain, the cap and trade system, carbon tax is going to be put in place at a national level. When that happens, there's a value to carbon, a cost if you create it, but also a value if you reduce it. I think we'll have a carbon trading market just like Europe. So I want to link the transportation and the utility sector together. If I can create through PHEVs an environment where we're reducing our, maybe not our net carbon output, but an economy net, a significant carbon output, if I can measure that through a smart grid system, I can monetize it and I can share it with the consumers, maybe take a slice for the utility. And for me, that's the value equation. It's a carbon reduction strategy and a value creation.
I don't have much to add. I am, an optimist. I think that just seeing sort of the level, talking about the sort of the national election that's going on, it's pretty gratifying for me to see energy being sort of a frontline issue. I used to always get frustrated in State of the Union addresses that energy and energy efficiency was an afterthought, and now it's really become a frontline issue. So I think that's encouraging. I think there's been a confluence of influences now across, the security of our energy infrastructure, the independence of our energy infrastructure, climate change concerns, cost concerns. I just think there's this confluence of influence that's here to stay, and I'm optimistic that with the amount of venture capital that's going into energy technology, the amount of young minds that are thinking about sustainability, the amount of corporations that are thinking about sustainability, I think this is here to stay, and America is a laggard now, but won't be for long.
Great, thanks. And I think that's a great point. It feels like we have islands where we are leading technologies more, but we're laggard overall. But because we're so large and there's so much innovative capacity in the U.S., that if we coordinate this in the right way and allow things to flow the right way, I think the U.S. can become a real leader. That kind of leads into a next question, and trying to synthesize all the great ones we have, is when you guys think about this in terms of jobs and job creation in the U.S., where are the opportunities there, and then how do we sort of pay for that? So it isn't just subsidies, but in fact, is there a way that this can boost the economy, create new sources of opportunity here in the United States? Do you have some thoughts about that?
This industry is absolutely going to boost the economy. We're a job creation machine. The solar industry, from manufacturing through installation, operation, and maintenance, it creates a huge number of jobs. Plenty of studies have been done up there by the California Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission, the Department of Energy, NREL, and there's roughly the numbers I've seen are roughly 2 times the amount of jobs per kilowatt as in the traditional fuels industry, nuclear or coal or gas. Amory, you probably have better data on that, but there, you know, this is tremendous. This transition is going to be tremendous for the economy.
This is the good one. I mean, Andy Grove came up with this term, but for a plug-in hybrid, electricity is by nature local, sticky. For oil, you know, as we said, we're spending, what does T-Boone say, $500 billion a year? So you have the effect that we could literally displace a lot of our oil. And Amory and I think ultimately electric cars aren't going to displace all our oil, maybe about 30% in the long term. So that's a lot of money. 30% of $500 billion is a lot of money that stays in our economy. And the other interesting thing about plug-in hybrids is there's even job creation at the very small entrepreneurial level. If you go, if anyone, there's actually going to be on our report tomorrow, Hybrids Plus, a local shop in Boulder that's actually taking Priuses, Priuses, and converting them into plug-in hybrids today. They don't want to wait, you know, for the automakers to come out with these in 3 to 4 years. So literally, I mean, I think, as I said, I think there's anything in terms of the money that stays in the economy and that the jobs are going to be created by these vehicles. I think it's a huge win for the
Let me
economy.
drill down one more layer on the saving money part. Even solar cells, the most expensive renewables, can actually make sense and make money without subsidy now in many applications. Let me take a leap, Tom, from your book. The Santa Rita Jail in Alameda County, California, has 1.25 hectares of solar cells retrofitted onto a big jail roof. You know, we build lots of jails in this country, although we don't always put the right folks in them. And first, they put a white roof on the jail to reject solar heat and fixed up the jail to be more efficient so that on the hot afternoons when the solar cells are cranking out the most juice, the jail isn't drawing very much. So you have the biggest surplus to sell back to the grid at the best price. And the result is that a $9 million project, which the state subsidized with 5, net cost 4, would have penciled out without the subsidies because it had a $15 million present value benefit. Now, let me then take that one step further by bringing in the efficiency argument. See, what you basically did there very cleverly was to bundle efficiency and demand response with renewables. Let me bring it to the level of my own house. Over the mountains in Old Snowmass at 7,100 feet, I live in a passive solar banana farm, 28 banana crops so far in a furnace. And my household electric bill, if I didn't cover it with solar 5 or 6 times over, would be about $5 a month, 4,000 square feet. And that 90% electric saving from efficiency was a 10-month payback in 1983. Well, it means I can run the household with 3 square meters of solar cells, and that system, including its storage, is cheaper to put in than just the cost of connecting to the wires on the pole 30 meters away. Now, if I were building the house now with newer technologies, I would only need about 40 instead of 120 average watts. So $2 a month worth instead of 5. And that means I could run the whole house on 1 square meter of photovoltaics. That system is so teensy and so cheap. It's cheaper than just the cost of connecting to the wires that are already on the side of my house and have free electricity in. In other words, the break-even distance to the grid beyond which it is cheaper not to hook up but to go straight to solar instead drops to 0 when your house gets really efficient. And I know there's a developer in the audience who is building houses that save on the order of 90% of the energy, and that's a good candidate for similar electric efficiency and running all on renewable. Well, with that kind of saving available, it seems to me this is a clearly positive cash flow for the country. We'll be getting jobs, and we'll be making a lot of money on the deal, and we'll be more secure, and we'll be protecting the climate. So what's not to like about that?
Maybe I'll sort of finish up with a last question here that may be most pertinent to the audience, and that's the following. Is there a role for the average citizen? is this going to be decided at the top echelons of power in Washington only, or big utility companies, or foreign providers of solar panels, or is there a role here for this average citizen? I'd be quite interested to hear your opinions on that.
It all starts with the average citizen, from politicians we elect to the way we build our houses, to electricity in our houses, to the products we consume, and whether we take public transportation or drive a car. It absolutely starts and ends, in my opinion, with the citizen, with the office employee, from start to bottom.
I'm sitting there thinking of a great answer. I'm inclined to something along the lines of, right now, for climate change, we attack the stationary source industry, but it's really the average consumer, as every one of you, the carbon footprint user. You know, at some point, the dynamic needs to change. I think we're all about that to say we want to create change that with the information that we have and understanding how we use electricity, I think there is a role for the average consumer.
I mean, I can say, automakers, if anything, you can criticize them, but they are incredibly customer-driven. And the Volt, when it came out, was started literally, I think there was maybe 3 or 4 people involved. It was the thing that you saw on the auto show in 2006. It was a shell. It was driven by a golf cart motor. And it was really just GM saying, hey, the Prius, is now, I think it passed 1 million sales globally, and we're thinking about some stuff. And the response was incredible. And even, they started the site, gmvolt.com. It was started by Lyle Dennis, who's a neurosurgeon, knew nothing about cars. Immediately got a waiting list of 40,000 people saying, I want this car. And lo and behold, a year later, GM said, this is my top priority. Bob Lutz, 2 years ago, said, electric vehicles are, a nice thing to do if you, want to be virtuous, but it's not really reality. He's now said this is the biggest transformation GM has ever done, as it's celebrating its 100th year. The Volt really was a consumer-driven and consumer-led phenomenon that got GM to create this. Well, now GM has done it. Toyota's like, well, I might have to consider the Prius. Honda, which has traditionally said, I'm not necessarily interested, is now looking at this. Nissan, Renault, Carl Ghosn, who was also very skeptical in EVs, now saying, we want to be the leaders in EVs. The emerging Chinese auto industry, there were 38 automakers at the Beijing Auto Show. They're actually now saying they want to be the leaders in EVs. This was a consumer-led innovation. And I think where I would say is why consumers are actually critical. They are the key driver because we don't know what's going to happen to oil. And again, if the government comes in and gives us a price floor for oil, the question is, and they may not, are people still going to go and drive these EVs and buy them because they're concerned about carbon, because it's a cooler car to drive? Anyone ever driven an EV? They're fun, they're cool, they're addictive. So I think what's going to sustain, I don't think consumers play a role. I think consumers have to play a role, and they have to be a leader in really getting the volume built up to enable all the stuff we're talking about.
And of course, the technologies you sell are, you sell kind of big flat roof stuff, but more numerically, it's house scale, roof scale, handheld device scale.
Well, we do both. We do big flat roofs, we do large central power plants. We just actually announced a 250 megawatt plant in the American Southwest. And we also do homes. And Amory was talking about, there's a developer on the road who's doing low energy homes, low net energy homes here in Colorado. We're selling today to Lennar, Centex, Shea, major home builders developing in California, 100% solar communities with energy efficiency appliances in the home, and the energy bill is 80 to 90% drop from a standard traditional house. Okay, so what I would say in terms of what people can do, one, you can let your congressman, senator know that you're interested in a level playing field and appropriate legislation to promote these kinds of technologies. But what people can do individually, basically look for ways they can save money with energy. Energy efficiency is fast payback. Solar is fast payback. We have a responsibility as an industry to make it easier for you, which we have not done well. Very soon we'll have a website, for example, and others will have websites where you can go on, put in your address, you'll see a Google image of your roof. That will become three-dimensional. You'll see the solar panels laid in, and you'll have an immediate value proposition put right before you, real time on the screen, saying, push this button, we'll be there next week. And that's the way it needs to happen.
Yeah, they use tools like that to bring the solar promise to every customer. And as we develop financing, so you wrap it into your mortgage, because, you know, when you buy solar cells, it's like buying 30, 50 years worth of electricity up front. Who has the money for that? But the same thing now. As we get the technical, financial, institutional tools right, as we raise the delivery scale from one house at a time to 10,000 houses at a time, that's when things really take off. And we're starting to find that things that spread like cell phones and PCs in the market are collectively much faster to go to scale than something that's more like building a cathedral.
I was going to say one thing that everybody in this audience can do too is the sobering news. I mean, I said who knew about the Volt? Most people raised their hands. The UC Davis did a study in the awareness of hybrids, including the Prius. When you ask people questions about what hybrids were, it was 20%.
Wow.
And in America,
even though it outsold every
American-made SUV, but it only has about 1.2% of the market. And so what we could do in this room is go out, learn about these technologies, and go tell your friends, your family. Because you'd be surprised that the level of awareness isn't as great as we might think of those of us who are drinking the Kool-Aid and are in this industry. And so getting out there and spreading this message is really key, and that's what everybody in this room can do.
The energy problem arises from the sum of millions of individual choices. So if we start making millions of individual better choices, things can happen real fast.
And the way we're going to make individual better choices to have the data and the access to what we're doing, the impact of our choices. You know, we call it sort of the Prius effect, but if you're looking at your dashboard, you can see your fuel economy on a real-time basis, you can see your energy consumption or your carbon footprint, then you can start making changes and managing it and seeing results and that information effect.
And to put utilities in the vanguard with all of their customer and technical knowledge and reach to every customer by making sure they can make money on the deal.
We'll sell it to you if we make money, I got a feeling.
Gentlemen, I just want to thank you. Maybe just in summary, a couple of points for the audiences to take away. One, we're obviously facing some real challenges in the world, not just climate change. Back here in the U.S. and other places, the infrastructure of the grid is not as reliable as it could be. We were presented a vision by Kitty that provides us a different way of providing reliable amounts of electricity, potentially even connecting it to other forms of energy use, such as vehicles. That system is more complex in that it has a number of moving parts, not just a central utility system producing power, but that what we've seen today, and we've heard, I think, is that these parts do exist. They're rapidly advancing. They're being deployed. It doesn't mean there aren't a lot of challenges, and we're only at the beginning. But I think you've also heard from these panelists that we can actually make great strides in a way that's much faster. One of the things I've been struck by in the debate in the last couple of years around climate change and energy and resources depletion is that we in America seem to have struggled for a vision that gives us a solution. It's a very positive solution. I think what we've seen today is that there really is a possibility here of moving quickly and rapidly from the current system to a newer system, that it could provide us potentially with multiple benefits, not just on climate change, but perhaps on job creation, technological leadership, and sort of reestablishing the U.S. As a leader for positive change in the world. So, I think if you leave with those thoughts in your head, and the fact that these panelists are saying that you are all part of that solution by being more knowledgeable by the choices that you make, to me that's a pretty uplifting idea that we could actually potentially turn things around within our lifetimes, and those of us that are a little bit older would love to see that happen. I'm a relatively impatient person, so I don't like to think about 2050. I like to think about 2010 and 2020, and I'm actually absolutely excited about the fact that we are at least going to give this a really good try, and there's clearly forces lining up to try to make things move forward. So I will, and now I just think we should thank our panelists, and Michael will finish with some comments.